Welcome to the Florida Real Estate and Entrepreneur Podcast, where we interview the best and the brightest business and real estate leaders. Our mission is to inspire and help 1,000 entrepreneurs to start and succeed in real estate and entrepreneurship. We will give you the exact playbook to succeed in your business through the experience of those who blaze the path. We're bringing the what's working today directly to you. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Florida Real Estate and Entrepreneur Podcast. My guest today is none other than Rich Lennon. Super awesome, interesting background, grew a big real estate portfolio, went down the whole real estate investor route, transitioned into private money lending millions of dollars, working 5 hours a week and teaching other people how to do it. So I'm really excited to talk to you today, Rich, about all of that and how you got to where you are. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Adam. Man, I really appreciate you having me. It's really fun to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Talk to us about where you started, how you got into real estate, what that business looked like, and where you're at now.
I was in my 30s, and I lived in Northern Virginia, D.C. area, and I bought a house or two, and I was going to be a landlord. I had this vision of being a landlord, had seen my relatives who had a couple properties. And my wife came to me one day and she said, "Hey, we're going to move to Richmond." And I was like, "Wait, what? We're going to do what?" And one of the things she did to convince me was looking at the price of real estate in Richmond compared to Washington and how the cash flow was different. And so we moved down here to Richmond, which is where I live now. And I started mine. I was like, I'm going to buy one house a year. And then I was like, oh, I can buy two a year, and then four a year, and then one a month. And then, we kind of peaked out at 4 or 5 homes a month. And, my formula was I'm going to flip half of them so that I can eat and feed the family. And I'm going to take the other half and I'm going to put it in rentals and put it in my IRAs. And so I did that for about 10 years. And, when COVID came around, I said, okay, I had kind of met all my goals that I wanted out of that business. And so I shut that business down. The money kind of stacked up. And I just started getting really serious about my lending, my IRAs and my LLCs. And it's been a great journey.
That is amazing. So wait, you were up in Washington, D.C. area?
Yeah. I lived there for a long time.
Okay, cool. I just retired from the Marine Corps, where I was last stationed in Quantico and lived up in Stafford, Northern Virginia area for probably like 7 or 8 years of my military career. So I'm super familiar with it.
Yeah, I lived in Fairfax for a long time, and it 30 years over. Cause so for a couple, Reston and Sterling, the whole area. That was my stomping ground. No conflict.
Super awesome. Great. That's a great area. What did you do before real estate?
I've always been an entrepreneur. By education, I was an engineer. So I studied engineering at Virginia Tech. And after my degree, for a very short time, I worked at General Electric in their nuclear program, very short time. And it just wasn't for me. And so I kind of was lost in my 20s and tried to do a bunch of startups. Some won, some failed. And I primarily, for a long time, was running a soccer business up in Northern Virginia, of all things. And I really equated that to like a plumbing business. The way I would do it is I was a coach and I coached and I had some successful teams, but then the local clubs would hire me to provide the training, and I would go to the college kids and pay them $25 an hour and charge the club $75 an hour. And so that was really my first swipe at being an entrepreneur. And, we scaled that up and it was great. And then my wife said, we're going to move. And so we moved.
That's super interesting. The beauty of that is entrepreneurship or being a business owner is really just about how can you create margin? How can you create a spread on something? I have something that I get for no cost or a cost, and then I'm able to parlay that into more value, right? And sell it or whatever.
And if you can just get a repeatable model, right?
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't matter what field you're in. I mean, that's fundamentally what you're doing.
That's so cool. I mean, you basically created margin. I'm making a little soccer league empire thing.
And it was good. It was not scalable, right? So you do on the way in which you make that margin, I think does affect that long-term wealth thing. So if you are trying to accumulate wealth and you are trying to build it, I think that you have to do things that are scalable. And as an entrepreneur, I think you kind of learn that. You learn it by, why can't I make it bigger? Why can't I make it up? And that is the cap that I hit doing the soccer thing.
Some things are easier. Most certainly some things are easier to scale than others. So as you made that transition down to Richmond, did you have you're like, I'm going to buy rentals, right? Did you have a bunch of money at that time? Were you pretty cash heavy? Like, how were you able to get into rentals? I think a lot of people feel like they can't buy rentals because they don't have enough money, or they do have enough money, they don't have experience. And you obviously, one of the two you tackled.
So I had the money issue solved. Not solved as in like I could run out and buy a house, but I bought a couple hundred burrs, where the idea, of course, being that I would be in for a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time, and then I would refi and get that money back. And I did that for a long time. And that was really what allowed me to, get going. Eventually, I think as you progress in the business, a lot of educators might say, hey, you can do this for free and it costs no money. I kind of disagree with that. Like, you can hustle and get some deals, and you could generate some cash. And then with the cash, you can go start the business. But you do need that capital base. Eventually, if you're during your scaling periods and you're actually, ironically, your cash heavy periods, you can borrow almost all the money and it takes no money to do the deals. But it doesn't start that way, at least not in my experience.
That's fascinating. So when you were doing this, were you taking hard money loans on the front end purchase, using their rehab money, fixing them up, and then refinancing them and paying them all off? Was that your model?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, hard money is hard. Some people might say that that's what I am now in my current business, but it is hard to go with high interest payments, even though I would tell you as a lender, that's what I do. But as the boots on the ground, I needed all the money up front. I wanted the construction draws and stuff like that. So I found people that I built relationships with, and they would tend to lend me money in the terms were advantageous, even if the interest rate wasn't. I could be in for less money. I didn't have to do the construction and then get the draw. I could take the draw and then do the construction. So that was part of my ability to scale maybe quicker than some other people did.
That's incredible. We talk a lot about with investors in my world that are flipping houses or buying burrs or whatever it may be, is, there's trillions of dollars in the economy. There's not trillions of deals in the economy. Getting the money actually is not the most complicated part. It's actually pretty easy to get money. There's lenders like you in your area. There's national hard money lenders, and the cost of money is just the cost of doing business, right? And I think what I've seen in the industry is new investors will start off with, kind of what you might consider sharky terms on hard money. No big deal. It's just the cost of doing business. And as they gain experience, they typically get more favorable terms. They also, what I often see is they also learn out of necessity how to raise private capital from people in their network. Maybe they've got lazy money in IRAs, which you'll talk about today. Or they're just cash heavy and they're interested in getting in real estate, but they don't actually want to do any of this stuff. And they're happy to be a lender on the deal. So a lot of great options. I'm excited to dive into that with you today. So as you scaled up this BRRRR, my assumption would be you got a bunch of equity that grew in that, and you were able to tap into that, and you got pretty liquid. You got the ability to gain liquidity. And why did you decide to go into lending? What does your lending business look like?
I hate renovations with a passion that I could not describe. and I don't know the number, but it's got to be 400 or 500. When COVID did happen, I think like a lot of people, we sat and we just said, look at our lives. And I had set benchmarks for myself to be at in life, and I had exceeded them. And it really was an opportunity for me to just shut down the business. And that was the main goal. I had met the goal that I wanted to meet. And I was really just getting tired of it and burnt out by it. And so I shut it down. And then when you have all the time, because you're not chasing contractors, then, I really started to analyze my portfolio and analyze my cash position. And although I had, I think most entrepreneurs just keep going. Like you set a goal, I'm going to be worth $1 million. And then you're like, get to $1 million. You're like, well, I could do 2. Right. And then you go to 5 and then you go to 10. And so I was no different. And I realized the way my portfolio, my wealth was positioned, it was positioned incorrectly for me to be able to build to the next level. And then that's what lending was all about.
How did you look at how your wealth was built? I love talking about net worth. I think we kind of net worth, where your money's at, where your equity's at, and how to smartly grow it. That's a really important number. I don't think we talk about enough, especially in the real estate space. We always talk about, if you're an active flipper or wholesaler, you always talk about gross profits, which is kind of a vanity number. If you're a rental property owner, we talk about doors. We talk about cash flow, but we don't talk about net worth enough. Because that ultimately you're building wealth and legacy, and that's the number that is the compass. Like, are you on the right path or not for building the wealth you think you want to build? And then, to your point, astutely, the where your net worth is does matter too. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that and like what you saw and how you repositioned.
So my aha moment was probably what a lot of landlords come to. Once they've held a property for a certain amount of time and start to accumulate equity. And so let's say that you've been like, I was buying a lot of properties. I kept as many as I could. So the portfolio got to be a decent size. And as I looked across the portfolio, and let's just pick an equity number, and we say, okay, like maybe I have 5 million in equity that I have on paper, and it's over there. And that makes you feel good, by the way. That's a good feeling. And but then you start to calculate like, okay, I want to get to 20 million. Like, okay, like I'm just whatever. So what do I have to do is I have to move my 5 million at a fast pace to get me to 20 million, because I'm not going to invent some tech thing. Like I'm not an Apple guy where I'm going to invent a product. So, and this is what I equated to. The BRRRR is awesome for creating wealth, but it's not very good for growing wealth. And so it creates the wealth because everybody talks about, oh, you have infinite return. Okay, that's true. Like if you do a BRRRR correctly, maybe you come out of it with, $30,000 of equity in the property, right? You BRRRR it, get all your money back, and now you have infinite returns. No, you have infinite returns on day one. And now you have return on capital, you have return on equity for the rest of its career, right? So an average rental makes like $6,000 a year. Like I have a lot of rentals, I would tell you that without the amortization schedule, whatever, but about $600 a year, $6,000 a year. And so on my $30,000 investment, $6,000 a year is 20% return. That's fantastic. If you can move your money at 20%, go move your money at 20%. But now you start holding that property, and now you have equity of $100,000, and you're still making that $6,000 a year. And so you're only making 6% on your $100,000 of equity. While you have the wealth, you're not growing the wealth very well. And oh, by the way, every single day that goes by that the market goes up, your rate of return decreases, right? And so you're infinitely going down a spiral. So if you have $5 million in there and you're only earning 6% return, you are not going to get to the places that you want to be. And so within there, lending was born, right? Because when you lend money, if you lend it correctly, you should be able to lend at 30 to 50% on your money. If you organize it correctly and you create the note correctly, you lend it at a way less note than that, but you do some wrapping on the note, and so you should be able to get that. So if you can take your $5 million and you say, okay, now I can earn 30% return on my $5 million, you're going to get where you want to go a lot faster. And so it was that internal thing when I looked at the return on equity that I said, okay, I have to reposition. And I don't want to chase contractors anymore. So it worked out really well.
That's the other number that it's almost like this is a phase thing, right? So we focus early in the journey. It's oftentimes a big focus on cash return, right? BRRRR's great, could potentially be infinite cash on cash return or really high. And then the second evolution of this is equity. How much equity do I have? And like you said, wow, I built, I'm a 5 millionaire. Like I'm rich, but you don't have any capital. That cash is not real. It's an equity. And the third evolution of that is looking at your return on equity, because it does change, as you explained. I think that's brilliant. It's also those first two steps are powerful to get you that equity, though. I think I don't want to downplay that, because we know real estate to be a powerful wealth building tool because of debt pay down, because of appreciation in terms of growing equity. Like an amortization table, typically in a 10-year lifespan, will pay down 18% of that loan, and then that compounds over the next 10 years. And if for some reason you were to actually hold on to a house for 30 years, it's paid off mostly by somebody else, which is super, super powerful. But there's a point in which the return on equity is financially unsound, to your point. And you decide to take this into lending the right way, which I'm curious what lending the right way is. Because when I think about a lender, and most people who are users of lenders, I would say, like 12% and 2 points, right? Like that's kind of like where 12% and a couple points is where you see a lot of people come in at today, the last couple of years. If I decide like, hey, I'm going to go lend my money, how do I turn that money I have that I'm typically lending out at 12 and 2? And is 12 and 2 even right? It's just kind of what I see. And how does that go from 12 and 2 to 30%? Like, how did you calculate that? How do we get there?
I do it by fractionalizing the note. And I try not to use the word fractionalize, because I was like, what the heck is that? But I fractionalize a note. And let me try to explain it in a different way. My average client, the borrower, the person who's flipping the home, they average a borrow from me of $200,000. The Richmond market is 400,000 mean. So like they're selling at 300 because we want them under the bell curve. That's kind of my model. Like I want them to be the lesser expensive houses. And so they're borrowing $200,000. I lend at 13% and 3 points for 6 months. Those are my terms, right? For this discussion, let's just call that 20%, right? Just because we're going to do math in our head and we're just going to call it 20%. Most of the time during that 6 month period, it's above 20%. But of course, at 6 months, it's only 19%. So let's just say over time, we're just going to say 20%, right? So I have a flipper who wants to borrow $200,000 at 20%. Now I lend to move and grow Rich Lennon's money, right? That's how it came to me. And so I put $100,000 of Rich Lennon's money in, right? And then I go out and I get what I call lazy money. I go out and get $100,000 of lazy money, and that's closer to 8 to 10%. Right. So the private money lenders that were maybe lending to me on flips at lower terms, I go to them and I say, I'll continue to move your money, but I'm only going to move your money like 8 to 10%. And so I combined their $100,000 with my $100,000, and then I lend it to the flipper. So on my $100,000, I get my 20%, that is the note value of the loan. Plus I'm only giving 10% to the lazy money. So I get their 10%. Right, I get the arbitrage on that, and now I earn 30% on my 100,000. Wow. If I fractionalize the note farther and I say, okay, I'm going to put $50,000 of Rich Lennon's money in, and I'm going to take $150,000 from lazy money. When we arbitrage that, the rate is closer to 50%. And so you are just a lender, and like I used to look for deals, for real estate deals. Now I just look for people to borrow my money. And I would tell you that the easiest job in the world is walk into any room in the world and say, who wants money? Because everybody raises their hand. And so like, there's no marketing. There's like, it's great. So I love it.
Yeah. Leads for days on that. That's super cool. I've personally done fractionalized notes with 4 private lenders on first position, fractionalized note and deed. So I'm familiar. Yeah, I didn't realize you're an engineer, so that makes sense. Like you got the math kind of figured out on that. If you were to put other people's money in, how that actually is a better return for you. Fascinating. Certainly fascinating.
So you can take that $5 million and then you combine it with someone else's $5 million. And now you're lending $10 million, which isn't a crazy number. That's only like 50 loans. Like that's not a huge number in terms of loans. And you're now moving $5 million at 30%, which is like 1.5 million a year. And I mean, and there's really not a lot of overhead. Like I have a VA who helps me, like who runs those closings. But, man, compared to what I was doing before, it certainly has been a faster wealth builder.
That is so cool. Okay, let's talk about risk a little bit. So if I have flipping, interestingly, is your risk is all on the hold in the back end, right? You don't sell it for as much as you need to. Something happens in the market. You can't pay your bills. You get foreclosed on. Of the loans you lent, right? Like somebody not paying you back is the risk. Has that happened to you? Have you had to foreclose on anybody?
I've never foreclosed on anybody.
Okay.
That's a product of customer service on my side, frankly. And that, hey, I was a flipper for a long time and I get it. Like I get that the city is a pain. I get it that you're going to go over. I get it that, okay, you ran into these problems because you were scaling. As long as the communication and the underwriting and the processes that you did when you created, your positions should still be secure. And you should be in at a spot where you're always fine to take back the property if you need to. And it's because you're always in that position, no one will allow it to go to foreclosure, because if they do, they will take a big loss. And the way you do that is you cannot borrow from Rich Lennon unless you have skin in the game, right? And I require an underwriting of 70% of the deal. And then I require 10% down as well. And so I'm really on day one, I'm in the deal at 60%. And I used to chase deals all day, every day for 70%. So as the lender, I have a deal that sits there if I want it, and I get it at a better deal than I gone out and found it myself. And as long as you do your construction draws correctly and you do your paperwork correctly, you really are in a pretty powerful position. There's a reason that this is how banks move their money. And we know as banks aren't the most competent organizations. And so as an individual, you're able to feel it and touch it and work through it. And I honestly, in really a couple hundred loans now this way, I haven't taken one back. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't wanted to kick a person or two along the way, but we've always worked it out.
Yeah, I tell people this too all the time. It's inevitable. Like a flip will, go bad. You'll end up not making money on a flip if you do this for long enough. In fact, I just lost 6 figures on a flip personally.
All right, that one's
not ideal, but I had private money lenders and they all got paid back with interest, obviously. So yeah, it'll happen. It does happen. So I think about that particular situation, and I'm very fortunate and blessed, it's not the end of the world for me, right? I'm a credible borrower, and I have the ability and the ethics that my lenders will get paid back at all costs, right? So, but that's not the case. That's not the case for everybody. That's not the case for everybody.
It is. I agree with that. I would say there's a direct correlation to the amount of money they have in the deal to their willingness to stay. And so if they have to walk away, and on the day they walk away, they lose 20 grand because they had to buy in for 20, that will keep almost everybody in the deal.
Interesting. Yeah. I had $0 in that deal,
and I think it's that is a
no
credit
payments
to your character that you had $0 in that deal and you lost 100 and everybody got made whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had no payments. It was all back end payment. It was all back end balloon. So, but yeah, if you think about it, that money is fleeting. It's temporal. It's irrelevant. Your reputation is eternity, a lifetime. I can take those same lenders who I paid back and make millions of dollars leveraging their money. So there's a longer game, right? So I'll take $100K loss today and I'll make $2 million of that same money over the next 12 months.
I think that's great. And, your lenders obviously chose correctly. I would say as a professional lender, though, they probably made some mistakes there and that they were very exposed and that it was only through your character that they were made whole. And to your point, there are people without that character. And if people are going to lend money, it's, you have to know what you're doing.
For sure. Okay, so you'll get into a deal. So the deals you're looking at have to be all costs have to be 70% loan to value. So purchase and rehab under 70% of the ARV, and then they've got to bring 10% of the money.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I like that position. A lot of people are, that's a good deal, right? Like that, it actually protects your people too, because it makes sure that they're getting into deals that make sense.
I encourage, and the people I train to do this stuff, I just, along the day, like you seem to have hinted at it as well. I've met some criminals in our business and the last 14 years. I really have. And I refuse to train someone to be a criminal. And so when I teach people how to wrap, one of the things that I really encourage them to do is that I take a first position loss in my deals. So if I take 100,000 of mine and 100,000 of yours, I lose 100,000 of my own dollars before you lose a single dollar. And what that does is it keeps me, the deal maker, making sure that you, the lazy money, is whole. Because sometimes the lazy money just trusts you, right? They just throw, here, take the money and get 10%, and as a process, I just don't like that. And so I really train people like you as the deal maker, you should be taking a loss. Just like you, when you made the deal and you borrowed the money, you took the loss, right? You were the deal maker. That to me is the appropriate thing. Yeah. And you can do that in lending as well. Cause last thing you want to do is you want to lose someone else's nickel.
Can you talk a little bit about this wrap thing? So I'll just tell you, like, I don't know it exactly how to do that. When I took 4 lenders to one deal, everybody had a fractional first position, but it was basically equal rights, right? So like, I guess if I lose, if the deal goes bad, they all 4 lose, right? So what's the wrap piece of this to position your money?
Yeah. So the way my note is written, it's similar, but the language is just slightly different than the one that you described. And so I call them on a document, I just call them preferred lenders. So the preferred lenders, it states like, okay, this preferred lender, John Smith gets $100,000 at 8% and gets paid out whenever. And it writes the terms that I've agreed to with the lazy money. And then it has and then there's another section, right? And then it's Rich Lennon's part. And Rich Lennon's note says, Rich Lennon will get the remainder of what was paid to the first person, right? So they only get 10% no matter what, even if there's penalties and all kinds of garbage, like they get 10%. And so I'm just left with whatever's left over in the note. And then further down on the next paragraph, it describes the manner in which it's paid out. And it says, okay, lazy money gets paid out principal, and then Rich Lennon's money gets paid out principal. And so it works like that. And so that was just the language within the note. And so they own 50% of it and I own 50% of it.
So basically waterfalling that money in the capital stack. I like that. Makes sense. That's awesome, man. This has been a little bit of an education for me too. So what are you doing? So I know you help people do this. So what does that look like? How are you helping people do these kind of things?
I do one-on-one coaching, and I used to do it in Richmond. And then I created a bunch of competitors, and they're friendly competitors and I love them, but I felt like that was a bad business model. And I started teaching people around the country. And so what will happen is someone will find me for whatever reason and they'll say, hey, I've got $100,000, $200,000, $1 million, $2 million. And they'll have a chunk of money and they'll say, okay, Rich, I want you to teach me how to deploy that money to 30 to 50%, like you've been talking about. And so we start out, we have weekly meetings. You got to get all the finances together, and then you got to get your notes and deeds of trust, or if you're a mortgagee state. So there's a lot of things to it. And then I just coach them through the placement of that money and then the receiving on the back end of the money. Because the money, even though I lend for 13% and 3 points for 6 months, I will tell you over time, it's an 8.5 month turnaround on a flip or a burr in the Richmond area. So I stay with them through the process. And then hopefully by the end of it, they really can now just take their money and they can repeat it. So I've helped people deploy as much as $3 million. And so then, within that year, they built a $6 million lending company, because they got another $3 million of lazy. So yeah, wow. I enjoy it. I enjoy the idea of the growth of money. And I like talking to other people who do.
That's absolutely incredible. So that's cool. How can people find you?
The best way to find me would be, I probably should have that, right? You can just find me on Facebook. It's Rich Lennon is best way. I'm actually shockingly better responsive on Facebook, or you can use my cell phone, 804-601-0330. And I think we have a sheet. I'm sure we'll get it over to you with all my contact information.
I'll link it in there. We got the richmondring.com.
Yeah. Okay. That's my local group. I run a local RIA. So I don't know why they gave you that website. I'll have to have a discussion on that in today's meeting, but,
okay.
We'll make sure you get it over. Make sure you get my lending.
No,
website.
That's good. Yeah. Rich Lennon on Facebook, Lennon. Reach out to Rich. If you're sitting on money, we'll talk about who this would be good for, right? So I'm imagining this as, hey, I've got a big self-directed IRA. I've got some capital. I'm looking for different ways to move it. I've just got some money sitting in a savings account, which hopefully that's not the case. These are people with what you call lazy money. We call it lazy money too. It's just kind of like a chunk of capital sitting around. Probably a good person to reach out to you. And
I love them in the IRAs. I'm fundamentally against having to go ahead and pay a bunch of taxes on things. And lending is right squarely on Schedule C, so it's taxed rather heavily. And so if you're like a dentist or a doctor and you're sitting there with a 401k with a big chunk of money and you're like, how do I accelerate my retirement? How do I earn enough that I can feel free? Because you go to a financial planner and they say something two things that drive me crazy. One is I'm going to make less money after I retire. Like any financial advisor who gives you that advice, you should fire them and walk away. And then, the second one is like, oh, you should plan on living at 4% of your money and therefore it'll never disappear. Another one that just like, are you insane? Like I'll never retire. And so if you're kind of trapped in that mindset and you'd like to get out faster, I could probably offer a pretty good solution.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, I'm super grateful that you took the time out of your day to come on and educate us on lending and on capitalizing on your equity in real estate assets, which I think is a really, really important thing for people to understand, that evolution to return on equity. Thanks for spending time with us today, man. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. I really did. Not everybody wants to talk about these things, and I really appreciate those who talk about it. I think people need to listen more.
Yeah, awesome, man. Reach out to Rich Lennon on Facebook, and thanks for joining us.